The engine puts out about little over 1,500 horsepower. It is a V, unlike the radial that you see there. This is a V configuration, and the engine basically broke up in halves. You have the right side and the left side. Right side has a set of pistons and connecting rods and valve train, and they're referred to as a bank. So you have A bank and a B bank. A bank being the right side, B bank being the left side. Unlike the radials, this is a water-cooled engine. You have air forced around the cowling of that radial to keep it cool. This one here, as you can tell, will be completely wrapped, so it takes coolant to keep it cool. This is achieved by a radiator. It is located midship, way back, and it is broken into two halves, or I should say 2/3 of the radiator keeps coolant running through the engine and returns back. The other third is for the aftercooler, or the intercooler, and that is cooling the induction temperatures that are going into the engine for combustion. So that radiator is a self-contained device, but it does two purposes. So it's very, very important that we maintain the coolant levels in this aircraft, maintain the mixture on this is 50-50. We do 50% water, 50% coolant. If the only Achilles heel of, the main Achilles heel of a water-cooled fighter or aircraft is if they lose their coolant by one bullet, grounds the airplane. You literally have about 2 minutes left in that airplane once a major coolant line is punctured before the aircraft is going to seize, or the engine is going to seize. That was the main thing. So if they got cross-shot and hit any of you'll see the blue tube here. There's a number of them on the bottom. You can see them right here. These here. Those are the tubes on here, and you have some on the other side. Those are the ones that runs that coolant to the engine. So it's very, very important that those don't get hit. The Merlin engine consumes about, and going into fuel, the Merlin engine consumes about 60 gallons of fuel per hour. It has two main fuel tanks, one on each wing. Each one holds about 92 gallons of fuel. This one used to have, and all Mustangs had, a fuselage tank. Holds about 85 gallons. You can actually see the red fuel cap sitting on the side. It's been removed to allow a back seat to be placed in it. It held, like I said, 85 gallons of fuel, but it really hampered the performance in the aircraft because it threw off the center of gravity on it. So doing maneuvering, they would always drain that tank first because it did impact, like I said, the maneuvering of the aircraft. This plane also was fitted for, and these Mustangs, for drop tanks. There was one on each wing. All this fuel that these Mustangs could carry was pivotal on them keeping up and doing the long flights with the bombers and escorting the bombers. So, and those tanks, the drop tanks on the side, are about 75 gallons, depending on the tank. It's about roughly 75 gallons per. So we're basically looking at about 420 gallons. So this plane could fly nonstop for about 7 hours. It was, like I said, it was pivotal for the bombers. So that's just basically a brief description of the components of the aircraft without getting too detailed on it. I've been asked also to discuss a couple things with regards to inspection. All of our aircraft here have to go through thorough inspections. This is the most important part to remember about these aircraft. They were made, this one here, or actually the first flight of the Mustang was in 1940. That means all that engineering happened in the 30s. This is slide rules time, no computers. They weren't engineered to last 75 years. And you have to keep that in the back of your mind every time you're working on these planes. They were not engineered to last this long. They were lasted for a war. That was it. They're designed to win a war. That was it. So keeping that in mind, when we do our inspections, always remember, okay, what's going on with this plane? Where's its weak spots through stress? So why do we do the inspection of the aircraft and how the inspections are performed? Is there a difference between a 75-year-old airplane and a new airplane? Yeah, there is. And again, be cognizant of it. It's fair to say that most of these planes, all the parts, almost every component, major component especially, has either been repaired, replaced, or fabricated. Some of the parts we can no longer find. We have to have them made. But again, there are surpluses out there, and you'd be surprised. We'll get somebody walking in the front door and come in with a starter that goes to a 2800 engine, and yeah, this was in my garage. And I'm like, thank you. That's awesome. Because we'll take that, we'll send it in and have it overhauled. They need the parts. Once they got the case and they got the parts, we can work on them. So anytime. So if any of you have a starter in your garage, keep us in mind. Based upon the type certificate of an aircraft, and all these planes have a certification to them, or a type certificate, this one here is a limited category. And basically what that is, it's a surplus airplane. It's got a airworthiness certificate specialized for this aircraft and Mustangs in general that allow a surplus military aircraft to be introduced and be used in civilian use. And we use this plane for, as you know, for rides. So it does mandate inspection procedures that are outlined through FAA, as well as the maintenance manual. Every plane has a maintenance manual that we have to follow verbatim of inspection or repairs or what have you. This plane here, we give it a 25-hour inspection, a 50-hour inspection, and then an annual inspection. On a experimental, we would call it a 100-hour conditional inspection. But this one here is currently going through its annual. That's why you see it all stripped apart. It was stripped apart last week. It is going through its full annual. It's out of service, and it has to go through a very, very thorough inspection. And again, I won't get into too many details. The main issues that these aircraft are prone, or I should say, the damages that can happen to this aircraft over this length of time, again, with the alloys that are used with these airplanes, and again, the lack of engineering that went into it, is corrosion, cracks, wear, leaks, and metal fatigue. Those are the main things we highlight. It always shows its ugly head. As a matter of fact, if you even look at the propeller, you see little blue pieces of tape on there? Those are corrosion. That's corrosion that was found through a preliminary check on that propeller. And what happens is moisture, you gotta remember that propeller is almost turning the speed of sound. That corrosion gets in there through whether it's rain, moisture in the air, what have you, and it forces itself from the molecules, gets into underneath that paint, and it starts to eat away at the propeller. So that has to be sanded down, get rid of all the corrosion, and have to be repainted. And that's a constant maintenance procedure we do, not only on the propeller, but anywhere on the aircraft. Corrosion always entered, and we're near the coast, so we have the coastal influence here, much less, unlike a one that's parked out in the desert. So we have to keep an eye on that. We look for corrosion, nicks, cracks. As I said before, the cuffs delaminating from the blades. The Hammond Standard prop dome that's up in the front, it has a large seal in it. They sometimes leak. In fact, we just replaced this one about 2 months ago. So we always have to keep up on that. The engine, we go through, and again, I'm not going to go through the details, but basically we go through, check all the compression on the cylinders, clean the spark plugs, check the wiring harnesses, check the valve lash, make sure we got a happy engine, and all the components that contribute with it. This engine runs multiple accessories, pumps, vacuum pumps, 2 coolant pumps. I mean, it is a busy, busy airplane and busy engine. It's doing a lot. Flight controls. Oh my gosh. You can fly an airplane without an engine, you can glide, but you can't go far without flight controls. We check bolts, turnbuckles, cables, phenolic guides, pulleys, bearings, torque tubes, connecting rods, hinges, fairleads, barrel cranks, linkage. All must be inspected for cracks, wear, and deformations. And obviously no impediment on travel. So it's very, very important. And I'll show you a perfect example. A couple years ago, guys were doing an inspection on this plane right here. This little fork attaches to the bottom yoke. That's the control stick of this aircraft. It feeds back to a torque tube, which goes to a belt crank, which goes back to the elevators. Elevators is what make the plane go up and down. When they took the little bushings off of here, this little tiny little fork controls the entire up and down on that airplane, and it's got wear and it's getting ready to crack. And these guys found that. That's the kind of things that, again, wouldn't find this in a modern airplane, but this is the kind of things that we have to keep our eye on all the time. And so don't assume that something's fine. You got to open it up and really take a look at it. Very, very, very important. And that's just one example of multiple items or components that we found on these airplanes that do eventually wear. Again, not designed to last this long. The landing gear consists of the front mains. We go through inspection on those. We do an actual gear swing. We actually lift this plane up off the ground. We hook up an external hydraulic pump to it, and we actually activate the gear, make sure that they're performing properly. They're coming up and locking, and they're coming down and locking. We have 3 green lights in the cockpit that tell us that all of them are down and locked. Tail wheel, same thing. It comes up, it comes up, it goes down. We also do an emergency gear swing. That is when we release all hydraulic pressure from the aircraft. We're basically duplicating or trying to simulate no hydraulic pressure at all. The pilot can go gear down, and if he has no hydraulic pressure, how's the gear going to come down? Well, it'll actually fall. The gravity will pull it down, but it has to lock. You can't land this plane if the gear aren't down and locked. If they come down part way, they can't lock. They'll come in and the gear will fold up and then they crash. You see these fairings here on the side? Those are there for a reason. Those are there, one, for aerodynamics, but also those wheel fairings, if the gear come down and they don't have 3 green lights, they can yaw the plane. And the wind will hit one side, they'll yaw it the other way, the wind will hit the other side, lock the gear, and they can land. That's the purpose for those. The cooling system, as we talked about, I said the radiator does 2 different components on this plane, but we just want to make sure that it's a very, very important part of that aircraft, as you can imagine. It is midship. We check it to see if it's clogged, gets bugs in it, mud, all kinds of debris, make sure there's good airflow through it. We make sure that it's strapped and tight, very, very heavy. Probably weighs about 250 pounds when it's full. And it's got just straps holding it up. Again, not engineered for it. And the canopy and cockpit. Canopy, we make sure that we got good slide. It does have an emergency release. Back in the war, they had a jettison out, bullet into the coolant, what have you. They can pull the emergency release, and that canopy will jettison off. As long as they duck their head, they won't take their head off with them. We have to simulate that. We have to make sure that that emergency release works on this canopy. It's part of our 6802, which is required for when we do rides, so that if anything was to happen, God forbid, we can land the plane on its belly, pull that canopy, push it off, get out of the airplane. It's the quickest way. We check that for nicks and cracks and what have you. Again, I just briefly covered most of the components of the aircraft. I didn't get into detail of every little item on it, but it is a very, very unique aircraft. It's an honor to work on it. Learn something every day on it. And the engineering that went into this is just mind-blowing back then. And it still is here with us today. It's one of our, I look at these birds now, they're our last, almost our last World War II survivors. So, anyhow, does anybody have any questions? Well, sure, yes. The question was, what's the difference between a Packard and a Rolls-Royce? Rolls-Royce is the one that developed the engine. They sold the licensing to Packard to build it, but they had to give them those specifications as well. It's relatively the exact same engine. I've heard, there's, minor changes, but for licensing purposes, Rolls-Royce still stands behind it, so they have to build it per the specifications. Yeah, what the gentleman just said was that he heard that the parts on the Packard are interchangeable, but not so much with the Rolls-Royce. I have not discovered that. I do, for instance, we put a -9 water pump on this engine here, and again, it's Packard. It was a Rolls-Royce. It worked fine. So there may be some instances, I have not come across that myself, but I'm not aware of that. I do know, a perfect example here is we've got Rolls-Royce heads on a Packard block. So, anybody? Yes, thank you for bringing that up. The question was, he was asking about is when he heard that when air was rammed through the radiator on these aircraft, on the P51, it gave it a little bit of a boost. That is correct. That's called the Meredith Effect. And what happens is in the bottom of this plane, it's got a scoop. And as it's narrow at the front, but it gets bigger as it goes inside to the radiator, you've got super cool air hitting that radiator, and it instantly becomes hot because you've got a very, very warm aircraft. And then it comes back out a duct at the end, which is a radiator door. That is the Meredith Effect. It gives approximately 300 pounds of jet propulsion. So it did make a difference. Huge, no, but they did find and that's a very good question. The radiator door on this, by the way, it's hanging all the way open, and if you do a walk around this plane, you'll see that main door at the bottom. That regulates the temperature of the aircraft. But normally in cruise, it's about halfway open. So that's what causes that small exit, if you will, and it does help with propulsion, yes. Propulsion.
How many people are in your maintenance department, and are you all volunteers?
The question is how many people we have here working on our aircraft. That's a good question. We have about, I want to say 50.
Don't look at me.
Oh. Okay, so maintenance-wise, the reason why it's a hard question to answer is we have docents here, we have people that work on aircraft that also have other responsibilities as well. So dedicated maintenance personnel, I'd say probably 45. And every one of us are volunteers. And then, like I said, to all of us, it's a hobby, it's an honor, you get attached to these planes, they become family. And we know everything about them, how they operate, their idiosyncrasies. We do have crew chiefs for every plane who's responsible to keep that plane in service, whatever it takes. They have crews that are with them that work on a particular airplane. That's not to say that if some other plane is down and they need help, and that crew, their craft is in service, like this one here is completely in service, ready to go, that crew can go work on something else. So we try to work on each other's planes, so that way you get familiar with all the aircraft. We also have two groups that do field trips. This plane here, about a month ago, got 4 of our best mechanics, as far as I'm concerned. Like, we got the best mechanics here in the world anyway, but they loaded all their tools, all the parts, everything they need. They had to go up north and replace the cylinder jug on this plane to get it home. That's what we do. Zero, same thing. Our Japanese Zero, the engine just actually died up in Shafter, and we had to set up a whole crew up there and exchange engines. So it's a great, great crew. And again, people that haven't even worked on a Japanese Zero before were up there learning about it and successfully got it home. So that's how we do. Anybody else? I'm sorry?
Does this museum have an endowment that those funds are?
Well, mainly our funds are from donations. We survive on donations. So anytime anybody donates anything helps. And that goes into these aircraft. You can imagine how expensive, especially this one, how expensive it is to get parts. Because there's a lack of supplies now, they're getting more and more expensive. So we sell rides on these aircraft. That's another help for us, huge help. We always tell people, time they buy a ride on one of our aircraft, it goes right into our fund to keep these things maintained. And then also we have private donations and also air shows. We take these aircraft to air shows and make money in that way. But it's all through public donation. Anybody else?
How many operational P51s are left in this country?
It keeps going slightly down. Right now, there's about 100. There's a lot of statics, but we lost one not too long ago, as a matter of fact. But there's also people that are still restoring them and in the midst of being restored. So that number will fluctuate. But I hope that answers that question.
How much airtime do they get? How much time you spend in the air? How often do you fly?
Okay, this Mustang here is fairly busy because of it's on the ride program. So last year, about almost 200 hours in a year, which is a busy Mustang. That's very busy for an airplane. Most of them are, if they're privately owned, 50 hours, maybe. So that's why we constantly opening this up, making sure that it's safe. And we always have this terminology that the plane's talking to us. Anytime a plane does something, even if it's minuscule, it's telling us, hey, something's not right, or something might be going wrong, something might be breaking. Let's catch it now. You can't land on a cloud called AAA. So we gotta listen to it. So if it's making anything different, and the pilots are key, they'll go, hey, you know what, I got a little smell of hydraulic fluid the other day in the cockpit. Oh, okay, that's huge. Red flag. Go find it. Because the pilot's nose is huge. Fuel, hydraulic, coolant. Those are the main three smells that they'll hit in the cockpit that tells them, find a place to put this thing down now, because it will not last. Okay?
Will this plane or these kinds of planes will fight in World War II, and because the hydraulic was so critical not to get hit, did they have extra reinforcements in those areas?
No, for the coolant, especially. Yeah. Now the coolant, you see that blue tank? That holds all the coolant. Oh, not holds all. It is an expansion chamber, but that's where we add the coolant. It goes all the way down under the cockpit, which, by the way, pilots have been burned severely from a bullet hitting a coolant line under the cockpit, because you've got 200 plus degree coolant in there, and it's going down to the radiator, cycles, comes back up, back in the engine. So yeah, it's critical. And no, there was any. No, because you also have to think of weight. You already got a armor plate right here for bullets not to hit the pilot, and one in the back. So they're trying to keep the weight down to keep the maneuver. So yeah, otherwise this thing would be completely armor plated and it would weigh too much. Yeah. Yeah, this is, thank you. The question was, just to brief you a little bit, do I have time? Brief a little bit about the ride program with our aircraft. We have multiple planes here that we do rides in. We have our PT-19. We're gonna have two SNJs. We got our Air Coupe, which is a fun little plane to fly in, and the P51. This is an e-ticket. This thing, we have fighter jet pilots from over here at Vandenberg coming here, and they're in awe when they get in this plane. I mean, we're in awe with what they fly, those F-18s. There's an F-18 pilot right there. But you get in this sweetheart, the noise, the G's it puts, even taking off. There's nothing like a Merlin. And these stacks you see right here, those exhaust stacks right there, that sound comes right at you. So it's very, very loud in that aircraft. For these guys that flew these things for 6-7 hours is amazing that they were in that thing that long. But there's nothing sweeter than a Merlin. And so with the ride program, what we have here is we do sell rides. We'll book ahead of time, whether it's here or air shows. We'll assign a pilot for that particular day. You can buy a 30-minute, a 45-minute, or an hour, and it's a beautiful flight. Like I said, pilots will take you out there and give you a little taste. Some of them do a little strafing, they come down. Some poor guy in Simi Valley thinks that we don't like him because we keep bombing his house. But it's just go over the coast, over the water, along the coastline. It's incredible. You'll never ever forget it. And we even have very few now, but some World War II vets will come in here and they'll sit there and they'll pat the wing, and we just leave them alone because that's just their way. And they like to sit in the cockpit. If we can get them in the cockpit, we will. But we've had World War II pilots in the back seat, so it's quite a experience. You'll never ever forget it. It has a well, they say the max speed on it is about 435 miles an hour. Cruise average 275, but in a dive, you know, gravity's the limit. So, but it's very, very fast, especially when it banks. When it pulls the G's, you just sink in that seat. It is an amazing aircraft. Well, it really, I can't say that for sure. Roughly about 200, what did you say, about 275 miles an hour, about 200 miles an hour, 300 at the most, because they don't want to be unsafe. These planes, if you ever hear them, you'll hear them whistle. There's controversy about what causes that. Is it the supercharger in it? Partially. But these gun ports right here, they found out if they change the angle of attack, it whistles through the gun ports. So that really is the cause of when you hear that Mustang whiz on by. Those 50 caliber openings are causing the whistle as it goes through. Anybody else? All right, thank you very, very much. Appreciate your time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Trace, for both the presentation and, you know, if you didn't gather, this airplane is undergoing its annual inspection right now. So thanks to Trace and his team for letting us borrow it for a couple hours here, because it's going to go right back into the maintenance. Okay, let's, what I'm going to do now is turn you over to Ron Fleischman, and he's going to talk about the history of this particular airplane.
This is a North American P51D model, which is the most prevalent model that was built during the war. And unlike your car, the only history you have on your car was, yeah, it was made in Detroit or made overseas. And then you make the history of that particular vehicle. Every single airplane over here has a history that's just, as the English say, brilliant. Now, our airplane is not the airplane that you see painted up as. I'll explain that to you. Our airplane, tail number 4472739, California Girl, built in Englewood, February 15th of 1945. Shipped overseas, goes to Stansted, England in March. Too late to see combat in World War II, so they shipped it home and it went to the New Jersey National Guard. This is a picture of Colonel Cunard's airplane. That's his crew chief. And you can see he's wearing, the airplane is wearing the paint scheme we have on it now. In 1950, after a stint with the Air Guard, this particular airplane, called back to service, active duty, goes to Korea. Once again, does not see combat. Returned to the National Guard, and it was declared surplus, and it was auctioned off as a surplus airplane in 1956. Now, the history on this airplane, we have a couple airplanes that are movie stars. This is one of them. Auctioned off, bought by Universal International. That's the way it sat up at Universal International. If you took the guided tour, it sat like that. When I took the guided tour, when I first came out to California, it was surrounded by boxes and empty 55-gallon drums and pushed in the corner and any other debris that Universal didn't know what to do with. What they needed the airplane for at Universal was a static airplane. They wanted it to fly. They wanted people to sit in it and look heroic. Rock Hudson sat in this airplane behind a green screen and looked heroic. When he sat in the airplane, the engine was removed, the propellers were gone, and what they had was an electric motor that slowly turned with wooden dowel rods, and that made a flickering effect over his face to simulate a real airplane. That was in a movie called Battle Hymn. Good movie. We keep on finding new things every day. We recently found out that this airplane was used in another movie, a thing called The Lady Takes a Flyer. Once again, didn't fly. There's a great, if you ever see the movie, it's available, of Lana Turner bailing out of the airplane. Probably had the airplane jacked up at this angle, all kind of mattresses and boxes for her to jump into. And then, after a while, we don't need it anymore. They kept it until 1970. And for a while there, they had it in a kind of a display, very dramatic shot-down airplane type of thing. It was sold in August of 1970 to a guy named Asher Ward. Asher Ward is based out of Van Nuys, or he was at that time. So now we have this airplane belongs to Asher. He has to get it down to Van Nuys Airport. So one night, under cover of darkness, at dark 30, they hitched up a truck to the tail wheel of that airplane, towed it down the freeway, down to Van Nuys Airport. Asher restored the airplane to look like this. This is Van Nuys in the 70s. It stayed up there for a while, and then he decided to move it down to Chino for a complete restoration at Aerosport. Aerosport was then owned by Elmer Cunard. Now this paint scheme is everybody wants to be a fighter pilot, and you want your airplane to show that you're a fighter pilot. So this is the paint scheme of Lieutenant Ernest W. Hopcraft from the 436 Fighter Squadron. In 1974, he sold the airplane to Elmer Ward, no relation, different family. Elmer liked this paint job. This is a paint job belonging to a man named Clyburn C. Cunard. He was a Clyburn H. Cunard, forgive me. He was a highly decorated commander of the 4th Fighter Group, and he has 25 enemy airplanes to his credit. He elected to paint his victory markings on the cowl of his airplane. Now, at the time, Rob touched on the fact, years before D-Day, a year before D-Day, they were just, if it was German and it moved, blow it up. If it didn't move, blow it up anyways. So they were involved in ground strafing, and they would give you credit if your gun camera showed an airplane totally destroyed. But he's an honest air-to-air victory guy, and he has 25 enemy airplanes to his credit. Now, Elmer flew the airplane for the longest time, and he passed away several years back. And his sons, Brett and Todd, own the airplane, and we have a lease arrangement with them. And this started in 2010. Considered, arguably, the best fighter to come out of World War II. If we had some P-47 jocks, that girl back there, in their prime, they would take you out behind the hangar and try to educate you that your airplane was a little bit better. The reason they pulled the P-51s out of strafing service was because of the vulnerability of the coolant. Hit the coolant, bye-bye airplane. The P-47 had a Rond engine, had a radial, and as they used to say, they're built hell for stout. This is the paint scheme that Cunard liked. Now, it's my understanding that he had this paint scheme just for a little bit. It was too gaudy, and now the Germans were looking for an airplane painted up like that. Now, the invasion stripes, if you look at airplanes now, and you look at the invasion stripes, you'll see nice, crisp sheet lines on the side. When the word got out that they were going to fly for D-Day, paint them on any way you can. So you paint them, and they were rough, they were ragged. And after a point, the Twix came down again and said, all right, now the Germans don't even have to hardly aim. They see an airplane with stripes from a distance, we're going to shoot at it. It's not one of ours. So the order came to get it off. Most of these guys, they're crew chiefs, I'm a mechanic by trade and by nature. And so I look for the mechanical end of the deal. Airplane would come in, they say next minute, next mission, the next morning, hit those invasion stripes off. So they would have been taken off with the only solvent that they had available, probably gasoline, steel, a little bit of elbow grease. The gentleman in the 50 mission crush cap, which is the hat with the eagle on it, that's Lieutenant Colonel Cunard. An early picture of ManO'War, not as gaudy, just ManO'War on the stripe. As Rob said, once upon a time, there were thousands of these airplanes. They darkened the sky with them. When the war ended and they surplused these airplanes, you could buy them, $1,500, okay? That's with radios, full of gas, no guns or bombs in. Now, 2.5 mil is not an unreasonable price for a serviceable Mustang. Colonel Cunard again, highly decorated officer. And like I say, we've had the airplane since 2010. We fly it, we give rides in it. It's a good airplane. Not the most spacious airplane in the world. When they took out the fuel tank and the radio gear, you can put in an extra seat. It's not the most spacious, but it is a ride. And let me tell you, you walk off that airplane, you're smiling, and you don't quit smiling for hours. That's it. That's it, and that's it for me. Thank you for coming on D-Day +2.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, so our next event, aircraft-focused event, as we're doing today, is going to be on a little bit about the beginning of World War II. So on September 1st of '39 was the start of World War II. And so we're going to kind of talk about where pilots start in the trainers. And we'll focus on that airplane right there, as well as our other one. And then if you want to mark your calendars, middle of December, back in '44 was the start of the Battle of the Bulge. And we're going to talk about our efforts, not only the Battle of the Bulge, but to restore that P-47 back there. So that's it. Thanks for hanging in. Thanks for remembering and commemorating D-Day with us. And for those interested, here in about 10 minutes, so about 10 till 1, right behind the left wing, we'll do that walk around. Thank you very much.